So you've got your cutting tools, you've got your measurement tools, you've got your parts kit, you've got your barrel, you've got your blank or your finish receiver, depending on what you want. Got your headspace gauges. Rivets are still cheap, thank God. You got your rivets. You're going to need tools. So AK building tools are pretty specialized. They're not like AR-15s. They're not like, in all honesty, they're not like any other tool set you're going to need for any other build on the market. They're specific tools, and one of the big things is riveting. You can always tell the quality of an AK by the way that it's riveted and how nice the rivets are and things like that. Now, back in the day, back before anybody really came up with a great way to do home rivets, squishing home rivets and shit like that, people would do what were called screw builds, which are awful. That's my opinion, but I have a feeling that a lot of people will agree with me. And luckily, we got away from doing that. And there's a few different options for you that are way cheaper than getting like the actual what is called a plinker style rivet tool. Those rivet tools are anywhere between 100, I would say conservatively 190 to 225, depending on where you get it and the condition that it's in. You can always buy it used. That's at the time that was pretty expensive for my blood. So the first foray I had into riveting was a very big learning experience because I was used to heat and beat rivets, working at a steel-oriented industry, and so I was like, okay, cool. So I'm just gonna get an air hammer, and I'm gonna make a few sets of bucking bars, and then I'm going to use the air hammer to hammer the head of the rivet against the receiver, and then the bucking bar will form the backside. Well, I was way wrong. There's the end of it right there. Doesn't really want to pick that one up. Yeah, you can see I put a little bit of a divot in the center right there. I was broke when I built this tool, and it really shows. I actually ended up throwing away the bucking bars out of just pure embarrassment to myself, and this is the first build I ever actually ended up doing using that tool. So this is an AIM 74 kit that I got for a song and a dance from somebody that basically destroyed the kit by splitting the trunnion open. That's a long story, but that's how the rivets turned out. They are ugly as shit, but I keep this around as a reminder to myself of how far I've actually come since then. So if you plan on going that route, expect that. Or go that route and make a better tool than I did. So after I destroyed that receiver practically, I decided to step up in the world, and I ended up getting this setup. This is a Toff Tool and Engineering set of rivet jaws, and these fit onto a Harbor Freight pair of bolt cutters. And these are okay. I mean, they produce nice rivets, I'll be honest with you. Take a look here. You can see there is the domed end right there. Focus on that. Yeah, there's the domed end right there for the head of the rivet. And then here is the flat side. That is your anvil that forms the back side. I did have a little bit of trouble using this, just because when I was in that stage of building, I didn't have any help. And these are a lot easier to use if you've got an extra set of hands to hold whatever you're working on, or if you've got a really nice vise to hold everything without marring it, scratching it, and things like that. But these are relatively cheap. You can find these used all the time on forums and boards and auction sites and things like that. I would honestly say that this is the best home rivet tool for somebody on a budget. These will get the job done, and they actually look pretty okay. So here's an example of that. see if I can get this the right way. Yeah. So there's a few right there. So those look pretty good. Don't look at that one. Those look pretty good. And that's an example of what you'll get using those rivet jaws. There's another good one right there. So like I said, they're easier to use with two people, or if you've got a really nice vise. So there's the home rivet tools if you're on a budget. Now I know there are a few places that you can get those plinker jigs for pretty cheap, used, whatever. But that's just my 2 cents. I would highly recommend getting the jaws if you're on a budget. So on the subject of tools, you're going to need a way to press on, press off barrel components and press in and press out your barrel, not only to install it but also to headspace it. And if you want to go that far, you can also use it to press in your barrel pin. One of the hardest things is finding a way to support all these strangely shaped objects while you're either pressing them on, pressing them off, pressing them in, pressing them out, blah, blah, blah. So this was my solution to that problem without having to literally spend any money at all. And I actually still use this tool a lot. So this is my version of a press plate. I went to a local steel supply and I asked them, I was like, hey, you guys got any like really thick pieces of steel, either that you guys can't use or you're scrapping or you're throwing away or something like that? And they had a gigantic pile. And so I just kind of looked through the pile and I found this. The scrap prices at the time were cheap enough where the dude was basically just like, just take it home, get it out of here, I don't care, right? And so what I did was I shell milled or face milled this entire plate as flat as I could get it. This is a plasma cut burnout. And then I drilled and bored and chamfered a series of holes in here that all correspond to a specific journal size on a barrel profile. So a few of these holes are for AKM, a few of these holes are for Yugo barrels. This one is for Yugo RPK. The list goes on, right? So I just figured out what size hole I needed to put in there, bored it out, and it works perfectly. So pressing the barrel into the trunnion is a different process because the trunnion is shaped pretty strangely. I don't have one loose laying around right now to show you. But it can be kind of weird to try and support it while you're trying to press something into it. Now they do make specific tools just for that. But what I ended up doing was I knew a guy at the time that welded, not very well at that, but I told him, I was like, hey, weld this plate on here, or weld this puck of steel on here for me. So he did, and then I just kept measuring with a trunnion, and I kept milling this down to size in order to get it so the trunnion would sit flat against not only this side on the plate, but also having its ears and the top bridge supported by this puck of steel. So that made a nice solid platform for the trunnion to stand up straight so I could press the barrel straight into it. Now this is the perfect size to fit on the table of the Harbor Freight 20-ton hydraulic press, which is also very cheap. So that was my solution to that problem. It is worth a shot. I would honestly say it is still worth a shot to go and look at your local steel supply and see if there's anything remotely close to this that you can do relatively the same thing to, depending on the amount of tools that you have access to. If say when you go to buy your drill bit index and you're online at the industrial supply shop, you can figure out what exact size drill you need to put these holes in here for you. I used a boring head, but that is an excellent option versus there's a few different tools out there on the market. I will not comment to their usefulness, but this free concept beats having to pay for tools. So moving on from there, that is the basis of your budget build. So you've got your budget kit, your budget barrel, your budget blank, depending on if you bought it with your kit or not. your tooling, your calipers, your center punch, all that sort of thing. So it is feasible still to this day to build one for relatively cheap. I'm not going to say super cheap, but relatively cheap. And the bonus is that now you have the tools. You won't have to make them again. You won't have to screw around with them again if you want to build another. Say you come across a kit and a barrel for stupid cheap. Voila. There you go. Now, depending on how deep you want to get into this hobby, there's a few different tools that you can make too. So a lot of my builds focus mainly on milled receivers because for a long time milled receiver kits were super duper cheap compared to stamp kits because there wasn't a big enough market for people to start making new milled receivers. So a lot of the milled receiver parts kits were very cheap. And I liked the challenge of having to rebuild them too. I got extremely good at welding, and I took up re-welds as kind of like a nice new challenge. So this is an example of one of those very specialized tools for milled building. This is a barrel block set. That's what I'll call them. So on a milled build, depending on what type you do, I like doing screw barrels because those are also a challenge. You need a way to hold the barrel nice and tight while you torque it onto the receiver, or you torque the receiver onto the barrel, I should say. And so this was the solution I came up with. This started life as literally a block of aluminum that I milled to size. That way it would fit onto the table of my hydraulic press. And I first drilled that hole, and then I drilled that hole at the intersection of it. These are both on center. And I took it over the bandsaw and ripped it in half. So what this does is that the kerf of the bandsaw allows enough material to be missing to where when you put this under the ram of your press, this sandwiches the barrel in between these blocks, and it distributes the load nice and evenly over this distance. It's non-marring, and it holds the barrel tight enough where you can actually torque the receiver on. So this is a specialized tool for doing milled builds. Now, in conjunction to this tool, I needed to figure out a way to torque the receivers themselves, because there are, I don't know if you've done a Google search, but there's not too many people out there selling receiver wrenches for, milled AK barrels and gulliels and things like that. So I made one. This is basically just a big aluminum sandwich. And this is more or less designed by me. I took inspiration from a few other people, but the way that this one works is this is held together by some half 13 threaded rod with some black oxide nuts. And let's see if I can get this together there. It is just these 4 pieces. That's it. So you've got the bottom right here. Well, the bottom. You've got the 2 through holes for your bolts. And then you've got the top side of the sandwich right here. Now, this is measured out and milled out perfectly to match the profile on a very specific receiver. And if you flip it around, it works great for slab-sided receivers too. So this was a fun little project in order to figure out the correct way to assemble that. And it works great. It works. I wanted it to be a tool that I'm not just going to use, once or twice. I wanted it to be a tool that I can use across multiple builds, multiple different times. And if you look, this is actually how it functions. So you put this around your receiver, tighten everything down. We'll just finger tighten it for now. Tighten everything down. You put this side up against your barrel. So this is your barrel side right here. So barrel in the blocks. There's your receiver right there. And then it's got this cutout that I milled into this block right here, where you can put in a 1/2-inch drive torque wrench. And this whole sandwich deal holds the receiver and basically sandwiches it in place, so you can use this to torque it on. You can see this one's had some hard use. It's starting to bow out a little bit. I might have to mill up another one of these blocks down here, but all in all, I mean, this is probably the most complicated tool I've ever had to make for building an AK, honestly. But I mean, it is what it is. Now, one of the most, if not the most important tool you are going to need to build your AK is, let's see if I got it right here, a penny. Or two, depending. This is to protect the crown on your barrel. So you just lay a penny over the crown of your barrel when you're pressing it in. That protects the crown from getting boogered up on your press ram. Right there. Now on the chamber side of your barrel, you can use a couple of pennies all stacked up like in a circle, things like that. But this is legitimately one of, if not the most important tool of your build. Right there. That's it. So hopefully this has been good help for you in order to kind of determine the route that you want to take. Determine if you actually want to get into building, things like that. See if it's feasible for you to do it on a budget. And I'm sure that there's hundreds, if not thousands, of different ways that people have done it differently than me before they could afford, the nice tools and things like that. So, I'm always interested to see the way that people build, and it seems like every day I'm learning something new. So, hopefully you might have learned something new today. Happy building.